Welcome to Satsang. So beautiful to gather together in this sacred space at this sacred time. Every moment is such a precious, precious opportunity to dive into the present and to just allow ourselves to experience the fullness, the absolute fullness, and the perfection of the moment. And what a joy, what a blessing to be in this moment together. What is, practically and realistically speaking, the best way to remove fear from our lives? Well, it's important to realize we don't actually need to remove fear from our lives. Fear is actually a good thing. Fear is that which keeps us from getting a little too close to the ledge. Just keeps us back an extra inch or two. Fear is that which prevents us from doing things that might give us a huge adrenaline rush in the moment, but pose a great risk to our physical lives. Fear is that which kept our ancestors alive long enough to reproduce and have us. If our ancestors were not afraid when they felt the earth vibrate with the hooves of a band of wild elephants, or when they heard the roar of a distant lion or tiger, they wouldn't have stayed alive long enough to procreate and have us. We are the direct offspring of those who were afraid enough to get out of the way. Those who were afraid enough of the coming winter to build a shelter, to put away food, to make sure there was wood for a fire. Those who were afraid enough of heights to stay back from the ledge, who were afraid enough of deep water not to go swimming in the middle of the ocean and get eaten by sharks. So it's important to realize that fear on many levels actually is our friend. It's a very pro-life experience. Fear is that says, hey, wait, more than I want to have that experience. I actually want to stay in my body. Fear is a good thing. The problem is when it paralyzes us. Fear for the danger to the physical body is good. The problem comes when it's fear to the ego that paralyzes us. So we've got this great thing that God gave us called the sympathetic nervous system. It's what we call the fight or flight or freeze nervous system. There's a wild elephant coming, there's a tiger coming, there's a lion coming, there's something that is threatening my life, or somebody comes in through that door with big, shotguns. Well, something's going to happen to all of us, which is our heart rate is going to increase. Our blood pressure will go up. Our palms will get all sweaty. All of the blood from inside our bodies will rush into our arms and our legs, allowing us to quite literally fight or run away. It's what we think of simplistically as that rush of adrenaline, right? You hear stories of 100-pound mothers lifting cars off of their newborns, or walking all night long, carrying a child on their backs. Feats that you would think there's no way she could have done it. But with that rush of the Shakti of the being, in that sympathetic nervous system, all of the energy of my body is rushing into my arms and legs. Suddenly we have strength, we have speed that we never thought of. It's a great thing. It's kept us alive. The problem happens when my sympathetic nervous system kicks in, when someone steals my parking spot. Or when it looks like someone is going to get a promotion over me. Or when someone looks at me funny or speaks to me in not such a nice way. Or gets the number 1 grade on an exam that I wanted. Or passes me up in some way or insults me in some way. And the ego kicks in as though death and danger were imminent. We get road rage, we get violence, we get depression, we get anxiety, we get high blood pressure, stress. All of that which so many people are suffering from is due to this epidemic of stress. But our stress has kicked in not because our physical bodies are in danger, but because our egos are in danger. And that's what we need to overcome. That's the fear we need to eradicate from our lives. Because if we live trying to protect the ego, then we never grow. If we live trying to stay within the confines of who the ego tells us we are, what we can do, what's expected of us, well, then we just play a role for our whole lives. This is what girls do. This is what boys do. This is what good girls do. This is what macho men do. This is what real men do. This is what, right? I mean, how many times in our lives have we heard these types of things that just keep us in boxes? And then there's fear of, oh my God, if I do this, I won't be a good girl or a real man. And we live in these confines. Oh my God, if suddenly I'm no longer the number one student in the class, who am I? And it's interesting because, as many of you know, I'm a student of psychology. I love science. I love psychology. I love research studies, data, telling us about ourselves. And you know what the number one fear that people have is? The greatest fear across sections of society. Single greatest fear? Any idea? A type of failure, yes. Failure is general. This is more specific. Public speaking. Single greatest fear, not guns, not climate change, not toxins in our food or water or air, not domestic violence. Public speaking. Now you think, what is the worst that could happen to you? Right? I mean, short of falling off the stage and cracking your head open and dying, but they don't usually make you public speak from the edge of the stage, right? There's usually some kind of a podium or something. What's the worst that can happen? You get killed by a tomato somebody threw on you? I mean, the worst that can happen. You're humiliated. Oh my God, I went blank. Oh my God, I forgot what to say. Oh my God, I made a fool of myself. Single greatest fear. Public speaking. Which means that our ego fear has taken over our actual survival mechanism. Where we should be really afraid of kids with mental illness and guns in their hands. Where we should be really afraid of the toxins in our air, in our water, in our soil, of climate change. What are we afraid of? Oh my God, I'm going to make a fool of myself. Oh my God, everybody's going to laugh at me. Oh my God, I'm going to die of embarrassment. Right? We say that all the time. I was so embarrassed, I thought I would die. Much more so than I went to Delhi and breathed the air, I thought I was going to die. I mean, you're much more likely to die from that than giving a bad speech. But you never hear anybody say that. Oh no, I couldn't do it. I would die of embarrassment. That's the fear we need to work with, is that ego fear. Oh no, I couldn't actually publish my book. Oh no, I couldn't actually share my gift. I couldn't actually take this step on my spiritual path. I couldn't actually take this risk and be something, make a choice that's so different from what my parents, my uncles, my aunts, the people I grew up with thought I would do, expected of me. I would die if I failed. What would they think of me? That's the fear we need to work with. Because that's the fear that keeps us stuck. And how do we do it? Well, there's a lot of ways, but the first and most important thing is we realize the fear itself is what's keeping me stuck. I'm much more likely to suffer misery by not taking the steps that I'm meant to take in my life than by taking them and being embarrassed. I remember when I first decided to move to India. It was decided for me. I can't really take any credit for that. But when I first realized that I didn't actually have a choice but to move to India, I was in the middle of a PhD program. And everyone said to me, well, make sure you finish the degree first. Like, get yourself settled, work for a year or two, make a name for yourself. Then you want to go off and do some Peace Corps thingy. I mean, everybody thought this was just a phase. You know, go off and do something, and it's all right. But if you go now, what are people going to think of you before you finish? Before you're all settled? Before you've made a name for yourself? How are you ever going to explain this black spot on your record, as though I were going to, come back from India at some point and have a record that had this black spot of having disappeared into a spiritual world for some period of time? But what I knew was, I was much more afraid of not living the life that I knew I was meant to live than what I was going to say to somebody at some point in my life if I did go back about that period of time that I had sort of fallen off the map. In those days, without any internet or social media or whatever, it really was as though I would have just disappeared into the spiritual ether. But that didn't scare me nearly as much as not following this call of my soul. And so the first and most important thing to do is really to say to yourself, okay, what am I afraid of? Begin with what we would call Jnana Yoga. Using the mind. Usually we talk about stilling the mind, quiet the mind, but let's begin by using the mind. It's a good tool in our hands. What am I afraid of? And then say to yourself, okay, my worst fear came true. So let's take public speaking, since it's the greatest fear. So what's the fear? Fear is, okay, I'm going to humiliate myself. Then you say, fine. Assume that's happened. Assume you got onto that stage and you absolutely humiliated yourself. Then what? Well, then no one would like me. Okay. Assume that to be true. Obviously, we know it isn't true. No real friend ever let go of a friend because they made a bad speech. You can be pretty sure that wasn't a real friend. But let's just assume for the sake of argument, okay, friends left you. Then what? Well, then I'm all alone. Okay. Assume it happened. Then you are all alone. Then what? Then I would cease to exist. That's usually where these sorts of fears go. If you can be very honest with yourself and don't run from the fear, but literally say, okay, whatever the worst fear is, Assume it has happened. Go there. Take it as a given. Humiliation. All my friends dropped me. Alone. Well, then I would cease to exist. And then you think, now isn't that interesting? My greatest fear is that I would cease to exist. And you can start somewhere else. What is your fear? The fear is this guy who's competing with me in the office place is going to become VP before I'm VP. That my boss is going to think that he's actually smarter than I am. Promote him over me. He'll do better than I will. I'll get left behind. Everybody else will get promoted. Okay, it happened. Everybody's promoted. You are the one left behind. Then what? You stay with it. And what you realize is all of them essentially go to, and then I will cease to exist. And that's where it gets really interesting. And that's where the healing is. You're not going to overcome this fear by just saying, don't be afraid. You overcome it by going to the root, which is, I am afraid of ceasing to exist. And isn't that interesting? That I have formed a way of ensuring that I still exist by this identity I have crafted and created around me. And if it shatters, oh my God, I will cease to exist. Because that's spiritually where it gets really interesting. Because that's the beginning, actually, of your spiritual practice. And that's why we say it is the end of suffering. The end of fear, because the minute you realize you are not that story to begin with, you are not the career, you are not the smartest one, you are not the great speech giver, you are not any of those things. So yeah, if they all fell apart and disappeared, well, then you would actually have the opportunity to be in the truth of who you are, of yourself. And that what you are really deeply afraid of is knowing the true self and being with the true self. And isn't that beautiful? Because the truth self is, of course, nothing to fear. And the minute we realize that and we befriend our true self through our spiritual practices, through meditation, through prayer, through seva, through devotion, through so many ways, well, then you start to realize, yeah, even if I totally blow the speech, or I never get promoted, I'm not going to cease to exist. And then suddenly that fear dissipates. Then suddenly there is no fear. That's where fearlessness comes in. Yeah, I'm going to try this. I'm going to take the risk because, yes, I could fail. But I am not hooked into the identity of the one who doesn't fail. Which means I can run the risk of failure without feeling like I will cease to exist. I can run the risk of vulnerability, of being seen. Because I know that who I am is divine. So that's the way to deal with fearlessness. It's not about push it away. It's about face it full on. Think about the story of the Wizard of Oz, right? And this wizard who reigned terror as long as no one actually looked at him. As long as he could hide from behind the screen and project himself, he had everyone cowering in terror. But the minute he actually got seen as this little man with a projector, well, there was nothing to be afraid of anymore. And the truth is, the minute that you really look at your ego fears, you'll see they're small versions of some aspect of you, or some aspect of a parent or a teacher or a sibling or someone who told you something at some point in your life about you. Being worthless, being stupid, being not good enough, being this, being that. And it's rained terror over you from behind the veil throughout your life. And the minute you pull back the veil and you're like, oh, hi mom, hi dad, hi teacher, hi this, hi that. Hi, this experience I had when I was 9 that I didn't realize impacted me quite so badly. Hey, you're just a tiny little thing with a big projector. Look at how you've ruined my life. All right, no more. Because see, now I see you. And I'm just going to turn off this projector. And then I'm going to take you, little thing, into my lap. And we're not going to be afraid anymore, because there's nothing actually to be afraid of. It's just been this projection. So we overcome fear by facing it, by looking at it, by seeing it, and acknowledging it. And then it dissipates. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Namaskaram Sathviji. Can you hear me?
आप जोर से बोलिएगा, सुनाई नहीं देता.
Yeah, Namaskaram Sathviji.
Namaskar.
Meaning of ego is losing our own identity.
Great. Is the meaning of the ego that we lose our identity? Well, the ego has an identity of itself. We lose the true identity in the curated identity. So here's how it works. First of all, it's important to realize the ego itself is not the enemy. The ego is formed when we are young. It's actually a very good thing. If you look at little kids, they have no idea where they end and the world begins. Everything is theirs. If you study child development, there's very specific markers of child development where they learn aspects of how they differentiate from the world. Prior to that, you have to say things to them like, don't eat those cookies. Those are Mike's cookies. You ate all your cookies already. See, that plate of cookies is Mike's plate of cookies. You don't get to take them. They are not yours. If you want them, you have to ask Mike for a cookie. It is his, not yours. Because they don't get it. All cookies, theirs. Somebody else's plate, no problem. It's all mine. As we get more and more socialized, as we develop more of a sense of ego, we learn how to navigate our way through the world. It's very helpful in socialization. It's very helpful in making sure that we are all individuated, respectful, responsible members of society. We don't steal. We don't harm. We understand this is me, that is you. I only have agency and autonomy over this, not over you. I don't get to grab you, right? When there are children who are developmentally challenged in a variety of different ways, what you see is they don't know that. So there's inappropriate grabbing, touching, speaking, because they don't realize where they end and the universe begins. As they grow, you end up with people who, if they really haven't developed a proper sense, you end up with psychopaths or sociopaths without an ability to actually understand how another person can feel. To understand that just because I want to have sex with you right now doesn't mean I can take you and pin you to the ground and rape you. Because I understand you have a right to autonomy. And what I want does not give me the right to take it. A lot of the criminals in the world, the violent criminals in the world, suffer from some form of psychopathy, sociopathy, the sense of being unable to experience empathy, being unable to put themselves in someone else's shoes, being unable to understand that even though they may seem like very normal people, but they haven't actually learned to properly differentiate their sense of responsibility in this global society. So it's actually a very useful aspect of growth. The ego is not the enemy. The dilemma comes when we move beyond simply being socialized, and now we want to be awakened and God realized and have samadhi and moksha. We don't want to be just responsible citizens of society. We don't want to just not steal someone else's cookies or rape or harm somebody. We want to actually experience and know God. Well, then we have to begin to let go of the ego. Then it's no longer, I end here, you begin there. But it's an awareness that there's no place I end and you begin. Not that that means I'm entitled to your cookies or your body, but an awareness, because I've come through the ego socialization, an awareness actually that even though I have a body, I'm not the body, I am spirit. I'm soul. I'm divinity, as are you. We are not separate. The same spirit that runs through me runs through you. And that's where our spiritual path starts really blossoming. But that's where the ego becomes a hindrance. Because the ego has taught us to see ourselves and others as separate objects. It's taught us to identify self here and others by that. And so then we start to transcend the ego, to no longer be confined by it. But it is an important aspect first of our growth. So it's like something we do a lot of tree plantation here. Pujya Swamiji is very, very committed to environmental protection, to abating climate change, to doing whatever we can for the planet. And when you plant trees, you have to put a tree guard around the tree. Otherwise, the monkeys eat it, or the dogs eat it, or the cows eat it. And the sapling can't live, gets gobbled up. But once that sapling actually grows its roots in the ground, and it goes from being a sapling to being a tree, well, then monkeys can swing on its branches without harming it, dogs come and pee on it, cows lie in its shade, and it doesn't matter. Because that tree is firm. You no longer need a tree guard around it. It has outgrown the tree guard. And I think of the ego sort of in that way, that it serves a purpose as we are growing to help us grow in a way that understands, this is who I am, this is what I'm becoming. But once I actually develop a real sense of anchoring and grounding, roots in myself, well, then I don't need a tree guard to tell me who I am. I don't need an ego identifying me based on body or roles or history. Then I move beyond that. And that's how it works. So it prevents you from knowing your true, higher spiritual identity and keeps you confined to knowing the identity of this small self. Wonderful. Other questions? Yes.
Good evening. I want to ask some little bit personal question which may have effects on larger society. How to overcome effects on minds due to improper parenting styles?
How do we overcome the effects on our mind of improper parenting? First, through compassion and forgiveness. Most of our parents, when we were born and very young, were in their 20s. My mom was 26 when I was born. Right? Now, my adopted daughter is 25. She's beautiful and amazing and wonderful and wise beyond her years and a baby. Right? I mean, I look at her and I'm in awe of the beautiful woman she's becoming, and if she told me she was having a kid tomorrow, I would be like, what? But you're still a kid. We look at people in their 20s. They're babies. And so when we realize how old our parents were, when they were giving us these impressions, these sanskaras, these impacts upon our life, it really helps to actually see how old they were. Because as children, we look at them as though they were, the wisest, fullest, divine, oldest beings on the planet who know everything. We tend not to think of them as a 20-something-year-old, scared, confused, essentially child. And so that's the first step, is that compassion and that understanding of, well, they were kids trying to figure out their own way. They were confused. If I think about, the things my mom told me, not purposely, but just because she was a young woman going through her own struggles. And of course it comes out and we learn it and we adopt it. But you look back and you think, yeah, God, she was struggling. She was confused. She was scared. She was doing the best she could. No parent wakes up in the morning and says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ruin my kid's life. I'm going to abuse that little thing so badly. Nobody thinks like that. They're struggling. It's amazing. You want to do anything that really impacts society, you've got to take an exam for it. You want to drive a car, you take an exam. You want to be a teacher, you've got to get a degree and an exam. You want to be a public servant, IAS, IPS, in the police, in the public service, you got to go to school for many years and then take an exam and pass the exam. But you want to be a parent, what do you have to do? Have sex. That's all you got to do. No school required, no exam required, just give in to the calls of biology momentarily. And there you are, boom, parent. So you end up with all of these people who really in many ways weren't yet ready to be parents, hadn't actually dealt with their own stuff. But boom, pregnancy, parent. And so the way for us to deal with it, I have found, is a lot of compassion. And then a lot of forgiveness. And then a lot of awareness that just because someone told me something doesn't mean it's true. And why am I today, in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, carrying the pain of something that someone in their 20s or 30s told me that wasn't true? Why have I allowed my entire life to be defined by something that wasn't true? They said it once, maybe they said it 100 times. But I've now said it to myself 1,000,000 times in all the decades since then. They told me I was worthless then. Well, I've spent the last 40 years proving them right. Why? That's the work we need to do. And so we need to be able to have the compassion for them, the forgiveness, and then we move on and we say, okay. I realize that what I was told, taught, either directly or indirectly, they said it or they just made me believe it, or the experience made me believe it. But it's not true. I know it isn't true. Why have I dedicated my life to proving them right? And that's the $1,000,000 question. And when we realize we don't really have an answer to that question, is when we actually stop doing it. Now I'm in charge of my mind. They may have messed me up completely. But now I'm the one carrying it into today. At that time I was a child. I didn't have the ability to think more clearly. But now I do. Now let me use my buddhi, my intellect, my clarity to cut through that which was true and that which was false, and to carry only that which was true. This is what reparenting is. We reparent ourselves. And it's not easy. And in many cases, it's the work of a lifetime. But it's important because until and unless somebody figures out how to rewind life and go back and redo your childhood, we're stuck with it. All we've got is the present moment. How am I going to address the present moment? And that's what's in our hands. Okay. Beautiful. Yes. Last.
Pranam Sadhviji, it's a blessing to be in your grace. We are seeing the divine feminine in the Shakti rising in the world. And the question, I think, but more than question, it's an advice that I'm seeking. How can the Shakti show up in the boardrooms and the business world today?
Shakti in the boardroom. So Shakti is that divine feminine energy. That energy of the mother goddess, that energy of the divine feminine. How to bring it into business and boardrooms. So there have been movements across the world for more than a century, bringing in women's rights, gender equality. I mean, going back to giving women the right to vote, to giving women all sorts of other types of equality. Critical, obviously. Critical stuff. Stuff that wherever it doesn't exist needs to be worked for. And we need to realize that equal doesn't mean same. And as women, as we stand up and claim that equality, we need to make sure that we don't do it by trying to be like men. That it's not, how can I be like a man and therefore prove myself equal? It's not, oh, women can do the masculine thing just as well as men can, therefore we are equal. It's an equality of energy, an equality of principle, of the feminine principle with the masculine principle. It's not, oh yeah, the woman can also wear the pants in the family. It's the woman in whatever she is wearing, whatever she may have chosen to adorn her beautiful body with today, embodies that power of Shakti in the family, not just when she wears pants. And that's really important because a lot of what we see in movements for equality is women trying to prove that they can be men just as well as men can be men. And that's not what we bring to the table. we bring something so special and unique. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of overlapping skills. We've seen that in the last many decades around the STEM subjects, as more and more girls all over the world are embracing science and technology and engineering and math. And suddenly you're realizing, oh wow, look at this. Not a man's world. So there's a lot of overlapping, of course, skills and abilities that have nothing to do with gender. That we may have always thought this is what boys do. But we're learning, actually, this is what everybody can do. And as boys are going into things that we may have thought of as this is what girls do. Whether it's literature, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's more of the soft sciences. We realize there's no subject that's masculine or feminine. There's nothing that makes a girl better at literature and a boy better at math or engineering. These things are not carried on X and Y chromosomes or in our genitalia or in our hormones of estrogen or testosterone. It has nothing to do with that. So we're seeing an overlap, which is fantastic, of everybody doing everything, which is wonderful. But when you talk about Shakti in the boardroom, what that means to me is that we bring not just female bodies, but feminine energy, which is different than masculine energy. And by the way, there are men who embody the divine feminine. It's not necessarily a one-to-one, like only female bodies can bring in the divine feminine. But we definitely need that power of Shakti. It's an energy, more of collaboration compared to competition. It's an energy of nurturance and nourishing rather than an energy of using and abusing. So women tend to be that divine feminine principle tends to be more around nourishing rather than on decimating. I mean, and you see it when kids are little, right? The boys are the one building things and then destroying them. Stereotypically. Girls are much less likely to create, the explosion that tore down the Lego house. They're just different energies. Both are beautiful. And they're different. And so where we bring in that feminine energy is around cohesion and collaboration and nourishing and nurturing and compassion. And in business, there's certainly a place for competition and for that masculine principle energy as well. But we've got at the moment a lot more of that energy than we do of the feminine energy. And if we're going to have a world in which our planet continues to exist in a way that's healthy and sustainable, we need both male bodies and female bodies to tap into more and more of that feminine principle in them, in the place of business, in the boardroom, to make our companies sustainable, to make the models collaborative models rather than competitive models, to make the goal nourishing, nurturing, feeding, rather than separating and decimating and beating. And that's something we need physical bodies of all genders to actually work together to channel that within them in our world. And the way to do it is we tap into it in ourselves, and then we bring it into the world. And as women, we stop thinking we have to be men. And as men, we stop thinking that we have to push away that feminine principle, that we have to be more macho, as though somehow that we're a subjectively good thing to be. And to really allow that feminine principle to percolate through all of us. Beautiful. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your evening. A beautiful day to our family joining us from all over the world. And so much love to all of you.